And so the journey continues. Welcome to the second part of the secret to winning a football match. In light of the current topic, of course, part 2 being the ingredients to winning a football match, I thought I'd start off with a bit of a metaphor. Today's metaphor of choice, spaghetti bolognese. The recipe for winning a football game is a lot like the recipe for spaghetti bolognese. There's two main parts of spaghetti bolognese. There's the spaghetti and there's the bolognese. Now obviously spaghetti and bolognese don't grow on trees. There's ingredients that go into spaghetti and they go into bolognese, but for the purposes of simplicity, in this episode we're just going to be focusing on what the spaghetti is and what the bolognese is. Now of the two ingredients, the bolognese is probably the more exciting agreement, right? And for the purposes of this episode, it represents taking the lead. The spaghetti represents the blander side of things, and in this case, it is maintaining the lead. Without that, it's going to taste good, but it's all just going to fall apart. It's going to be a big mess. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Putting the metaphor aside for the minute, no matter who you're playing against, what league you're playing in, to some extent what sport you're playing in, these two ingredients are essential to win any game. It's, once again, just like in the first episode, sounds really obvious, but it has to be mentioned. Of course, things can get a bit more complicated if the other team takes the lead and you got to come back, but we'll get into that later. So we'll start with the bolognese, taking the lead. So there's two ways that can happen. One is the simplest way, of course. You score the first goal. That's it. You're done. You've done the first part, the first ingredient to winning a football match. You've taken the lead. Now, if you don't score the first goal, assuming another goal has been scored, you got to come from behind. The most obvious difficulty that comes to mind, as we talked about in the last video, is that now not only do you have to score a winner, like the first goal, but also you got to score an equalizer, and on top of that, the winner is harder to score, as covered in the last video. And if things get really bad, you need to score some consolation goals before you can even start thinking about those equalizers and the winner eventually. Now in the last video we mentioned ADR, and there's high ADR teams, low ADR teams, and if you haven't watched that video, basically it means low ADR means defensive, high ADR means attacking or more aggressive teams. It's a bit more than that, but just if you haven't watched it, then we'll get by on that, at least for now. Now, with regards to taking that lead, that first way of taking the lead, scoring that first goal, is more suited to teams with a low ADR. As mentioned in the previous video, the start of a game is when a team's probably more defensively loose. They want to think they got a chance of scoring. So it's a bit easier to score a goal without having to commit to an attack, which is what obviously suits a team with lower ADR. A couple of great examples of teams of lower ADR are Leicester's title-winning team of 2015-16 and Manchester United of 2008-2009 season. Each of those teams had 8 or more 1-0 victories throughout the season. In fact, Manchester United had a 14-game period of not conceding a goal, and in that time, 8 victories were 1-0 victories. Absolutely phenomenal record, that one. And of course that title came at the expense of Liverpool. But part of taking the lead by scoring the first goal means obviously you can't concede the first goal. So you either got to be just really quick at scoring a goal, or you just got to be able to hold them off until the opportunity arises. So it's more suited to a sort of a sit and wait approach from a team like those two teams I mentioned, Leicester and Manchester United of those years. Now the alternative way of taking the lead is obviously scoring after they've already scored. Alternatively, this includes situations where it's a scoring draw, so it's a 1-1, 2-2, 3-3, or the other team once again has taken the lead, come back from behind or something, it might be 2-1 to them or something along those lines. Of course, nobody puts themselves in these situations on purpose. You don't want the opposition to score, but as mentioned in the previous video, if you want to score a goal, you got to raise your ADR a little bit. That means your defense might go down a bit. It'll leave you a bit vulnerable to the opposition, who then might score a goal, and things just get complicated. Obviously, for situations like this, teams that have a higher ADR or are better at playing at a high ADR are more suited to the situation, because obviously the opposition doesn't need to come out anymore. They've taken the lead, or they've gotten the draw that they want to get, or whatever the situation might be, and you need to be a bit more creative with your attacking exploits. Of course, that Leicester side in 2015-16 didn't fall behind very often, and that's essentially how they got to that title in the end, because for the times they did fall behind, they struggled to break down teams. The thing that Leicester side had playing for them is obviously nobody was expecting them to win the title, so everyone was a bit more gung-ho at them than they would be against, say, Manchester United or Liverpool or Manchester City or Tottenham even in that season. Chelsea were up there as well. But generally speaking, teams like that don't end up necessarily winning because they just draw too many games. When it comes to winning the league title, of course, winning games takes priority over the threat of losing games, because you'd rather win a game and lose a game than draw two games. That said, losing games can be a real momentum killer, and sometimes it pays off to just be a bit on the safe side. But as you can see, there's two ways to make a bolognese: one that suits more defensive teams, one suits more attacking teams. But then we need some spaghetti to hold up that bolognese. So you've taken the lead, now we've got to hold it. Now there's two ways to hold the lead, and once again, of course, there's a lower ADR version and a higher ADR version. The more conventional way of maintaining a lead is actually the lower ADR version, which is simple: just don't concede. If you keep to the simple things, you score your goal and don't let them score. 1-0 is all you need. That's it. It's 3 points to win. That said, not every team's particularly good at holding a team off. So in that case, you're going to have to do it the hard way. Once again, you got to outscore the opposition. Or since you've already taken the lead, you've got to match them. But the important part here is you can't match them after they've scored. You got to stay ahead. It's not enough to take a lead, let them score, and then score again, because that second goal to score is going to be a lot harder to score than the first. Now here, the important thing to remember is once you've already taken the lead, you're in that advantageous position where you don't have to come out, you don't have to increase your ADR, you don't have to lower your defense. The onus is on the other team to attack you, no matter who's at home, who's away. It just becomes a matter of what your strengths are. So if your team is better defensively, then taking the lead is less than half the job done. They've got a lot more work to do. On the other hand, if your team is good at the defensive game, then scoring a goal and taking that lead, or more importantly, taking that lead, is more than half the job done, because they're good at keeping the team out. You can see now that teams that are better at, say, low ADR or defense, or better at high ADR or attack, will be more suited to different situations. And given a certain score line, there's no particular guarantee of whether or not a team's gonna win the game, or maybe see out a draw, or whatever it is. This of course means that if a team concedes early, if they're better at maintaining a lead, then that situation isn't going to help them. Whereas if a high ADR team concedes early, coming back from that, it's going to be easier for them to do. On the other hand, if a high ADR team, say, gets a late winner, there's no guarantee they're going to hold on to that. Whereas a team that's good at low ADR gets a late winner, there's a really good chance that they're going to hold that off. Now, in terms of best practice, which one's better? Having a high ADR, having a low ADR? The truth is, best practice is having both. The best teams transition between the two. And that Manchester United team is another great example of that. 2008-9, they had that period there where they just got their 1-0 leads, and that's all they needed to do. But then for the rest of the season, that had to go with the gung-ho approach and just try and make sure they score the goals and get the win. Another great example of teams with great balance and knowing how to switch between the two was Manchester City of the 2018-19 season and Liverpool of the 2018-19 season. They had a great battle right to the end, and they just strung an incredible amount of wins together. It's unprecedented in the Premier League for sure. You might see it in other leagues, but even there, it's quite rare to see something go quite so head-to-head right to the end of the season. But it's safe to say that over the course of the 90 minutes, the more important one, especially for knockout competition, is probably having the low ADR mode down pat, at least in the English Premier League. Of course, if you go to other leagues that might be a bit more tactical or more defensive minded, you'll have the lower teams really trying to grind out results and just build a wall and stop the team from getting through, in which case having the attacking ability becomes more important. But in a league like the Premier League, teams just going at it from the first whistle right to the end. Every team feels like they can win against. They're not happy with the draw usually. They want to win. They want an upset. An upset isn't really an upset unless it's a win. In that case, the general setup is that ADRs are a bit higher, and having that defensive part down pat, the low ADR mode, really helps, because eventually if they're going to make a mistake and you pounce, that's the key to winning games. Consistently anyway. So in a general situation, if two teams are roughly evenly matched, high ADR will lose to low ADR. That said, that only works because the team with low ADR operating at a high level still has a form of high ADR, which they can switch on when the moment comes. One of the great examples of this matchup is the Newcastle team of 1995 and 1996. Kevin Keegan was the manager then, and Newcastle were rivaling with Manchester United. It was this "we will outscore you" approach, as opposed to "we'll take the lead and we'll stop you there." It worked for a while, but what was actually working for them was their smaller victories, the 1-0 victories, which they actually had a fair few of. But eventually the wheels came off, and they lost 5 games out of 8 in a period between February and March, just because you can't keep that up. During a season, you need to have that steel approach as well. And they came up against teams with a more defensive backbone, and they lost. And because of that, they lost the title. Likewise, Liverpool in the 2013-14 season, when they were up against Manchester City, they went on a run of, I think it was 12 games or something like that. And eventually, they always beat teams in the first 20 minutes. They just blow them out of the water, score 3 or 4 goals consistently. It was insane. But they came up against Chelsea, 3rd round from the end of the season. And of course, Chelsea had a defensive backbone that was too strong. They lost their patience, and the rest is history. They lost 2-0, and once again, it cost them the title. So I think you get the picture. It's really simple. There's 2 ingredients to winning a game. You got to take the lead, and you got to hold it. The earlier you take the lead, the longer you got to hold it. But the later you take the lead, the more your ADR is going to have to go up. And once you take that lead, you hold on to it whatever way your team knows how. If you got to score more goals, do it. If you can hold on, do it. Just get it done. And that is it for this episode. That is how you get spaghetti and bolognese to win a game. Next episode, we're going to get into some tactics finally. And we're going to go into a bit more depth on how we get the spaghetti in our beautiful spaghetti and bolognese. The next episode will be on defense, so keep an eye out for that one in the coming months. Of course, we have our podcast running weekly now. That's with me and Cos. We're also on the social media platforms Tumblr, and Facebook is there to keep everything mushed together and keep you in the loop of what's happening next at Klosmi Commentary. If you like this video, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more of our stuff. And of course, please give us some feedback in the comments section. We love hearing feedback. And that's all there is for today. So thank you again for watching, and I'll see you next time.